So, a funny thing happened between now and the last time we spoke. I know you were expecting us to talk about religious freedoms today, but as it turns out, I forgot 3 very, very important things in our first episode pertaining to definitions and philosophies, all which have to do with the very foundation of the Bill of Rights itself. Kind of funny that I would forget something so important so soon, but hey, what can I tell you? No producers, no editors, no writers, just me by myself. It is the first slip up. It probably won't be the last. So think of today as kind of a bonus episode, sort of like an amendment, funny enough, on a show all about amendments. Also, not sure if I mentioned this or not yet, but we plan to put out one of these episodes every 2 weeks. That's the plan. If it changes, I'll let you know. But because of my oversight, we're going to get 3 full weeks of your Bill of Rights podcast. Kind of exciting. Anyways, enough jabbering from me. Let's get into today's episode regarding very, very important foundations.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The American Declaration of Independence, 1776.
Every giant and impressive tree begins first by planting seeds. Every house, building, fortress, or castle, no matter how big or small, cannot stand without first building a solid foundation. While it's true that those seeds that make that tree also need to be properly watered, in good soil, fed sunlight, and occasionally pruned, while that foundation still needs proper and various craftsmanship from multiple trades to turn into an ideal dwelling, none of that even matters if you don't first have those seeds or foundation to begin with. Without them, all other future steps might as well not even calculate into your orchard or design. In fact, they do not and cannot even exist. Welcome to another episode of the Your Bill of Rights podcast. In this episode, we will be continuing with a few more definitions and philosophies regarding the original 3 recognized and unalienable rights, solidified not in the Bill of Rights in 1791, but 15 years earlier in our Declaration of Independence. If this is your first time joining us, then I invite you to go back and start with our very first episode, Definitions and Philosophies. That way, you'll have a much better grasp on all future rights discussed as we move forward. For the rest of us, let's begin our exploration of the 3 foundational principles that make our Bill of Rights possible. Today, we will be conducting a close examination of today's opening quote, and we're going to jump around it a bit to help get a better understanding of what is being declared. There is a lot here to unpack. In this episode, we shall also be introduced to Webster's 1828 dictionary. Going forward, whenever a word is defined, it will have been so using this dictionary. This will help us better understand exactly what our founding fathers were conveying with the words they carefully and deliberately chose. Firstly, that all men are created equal. If we remember back to episode 1, natural law determines equality among all of us, given that, in our basic natural state, we all seek and pursue the same basic things. We are all made from the same elements and in the same basic way. In the context of natural law, equal is most accurately defined as having the same value or worth. Created, in the context of this line, simply means caused to exist. More simply, brought into existence. Lastly, let's talk about the word men. The use of the word men does not mean that it does not include women. In the late 18th century, men was a shortened way of saying mankind, meaning anyone from the human race. With a better understanding of these words in mind now, that all men are created equal could be elaborated to say that all of humankind exists with the same value and worth. Let us now look at the phrase that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. In episode 1, we learned that unalienable rights, otherwise known as non-foreign or negative rights, meaning rights that do not take effort to produce, are rights, otherwise known as entitlements, granted and belonging to us by the laws of nature simply because we exist. These rights are certain, meaning undoubted or unquestionable, the word endowed meaning permanently supplied. Their creator is probably the most brilliant two words from this passage. There stands in place of men or mankind, and creator being the thing that creates, produces, or causes. Notice how our founders used their creator and not the creator, a subtle but powerful difference which we will be exploring in our next episode. With a better understanding of these words in mind now, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, could be elaborated to say that all mankind is permanently granted unquestionable and natural entitlements by their particular believed means of coming to existence. The line, "that among these are," is also a brilliant phrasing. It's a simple but effective way to say there are much more than what we are about to list, but here are a few, hence leaving room for the Bill of Rights. Now let's move on to the listed rights themselves and the philosophy behind them, starting first with the pursuit of happiness. Happiness is defined as a few things. First, the agreeable sensations that spring from the enjoyment of good. Good being another key word you'll want to hold on to for episodes in the future. Secondly, the state of a being in which his desires are gratified. And finally, by the enjoyment of pleasure without pain. Pursuit is defined as a continuing endeavor meaning effort or attempt. In other words, we have a right to continually attempt to bring about the gratification of our desires so as to enjoy painless pleasure. Natural law dictates that each of us has an unalienable right to pursue happiness. Notice, though, that it is not a right to happiness itself. If happiness alone was an inherent right, we would always feel happy. But we don't. There is much in this world that naturally commands other emotions. When someone we love dies, for example, we feel sad. Some who find themselves in the dark might feel afraid. If you're behind on your bills, you might feel stressed. And if you're like me, you might feel anxious on an airplane or angry when you have to pay taxes. There are many things in the natural world that bring to us chaos and the proper emotions to match. Ironically, chaos is, in part, the natural and orderly state of things. That is why each of us are entitled to pursue happiness in order to remedy them, rather than just happiness alone. Happiness as a pursuit rather than a guarantee is happiness in its natural state for a very distinct reason. While we can define what happiness is, there is no one definitive formula to bring about happiness to everyone. Each of us will naturally seek out a way of managing and eliminating our stresses, fears, and anger by various means, and we do so without thinking. Two people, both afraid of the dark, will likely have very different avenues to gratify their desire to be unafraid. One might begin calm breathing exercises, while the other prays to their God for serenity. The calm breathing and prayer are the different pursuits, but the natural inclination to quell the fear is the same. Happiness can also be viewed as an agreeable or good position in one's life. Like when we aim to manage different negative feelings, we also naturally seek out an existence in which we find satisfactory. Someone who wants to be a writer living quietly in a cabin in the mountains will always make time to write and will do whatever planning is necessary to secure that cabin. One who wants to become a wealthy urbanite playboy may invest their money into things that will double and triple in return, as well as go out every night to attract the fair sex. These are also pursuits that require very different avenues to achieve. The aspiring humble writer would not be happy in a big city high-rise with 4 girlfriends, and the rich urbanite would not find his happiness alone on a mountain. It's important to note here that even in their preferred endeavors, happiness might not be achieved. The writer may go stir-crazy all alone, and the urbanite playboy might find his lifestyle to be shallow and meaningless. If happiness was itself a right, then either scenario would be completely successful and would work for both individuals. Since it does not, and since we all naturally strive to do all these things in our own way, and there is no guarantee that our attempts will produce wanted results, then logic and reason dictate that happiness within the edicts of natural law cannot be a right, only the pursuit of it. Moving backwards still, we have the right to liberty. In the context of our rights, liberty is actually defined as natural liberty, having the power of acting as one thinks fit without any restraint or control, except from the laws of nature. It is a state of exemption from the control of others and from positive laws and the institutions of social life. Plainly speaking, this means each of us has the right to essentially live however we want to, surrounded by whomever we want, without having to be concerned with what others may want from or think about us, and without interference from the government, church, or other such societal organizations. Know this though, the one caveat, except from the laws of nature. Remember again that natural law dictates that we are all created equal and of equal negative rights. The fact that our negative rights belong to us naturally means that no one can take them away. No one also meaning you in regards to someone else. Seeing as no one can take away your rights, it is logical then you cannot take away anyone else's rights either. Let's use our rich urbanite playboy friend as an example. His lifestyle of chasing money and women may be abhorrent to, say, the local church, but as long as he isn't conducting it on church grounds, it is none of their business. His playboy antics of bringing a girl home with him, only to then brush her out the next morning like yesterday's garbage, may very likely bring about negative feelings from said girl towards him. But as long as he did not force the girl to do anything she didn't want to, so long as she participated willingly, then he has broken no law and is well within his own agency and right to never speak to her again. And there may even be some folks in the government who feel his wealth is, quote, beyond a reasonable extravagance. But so long as it was obtained legally with proper taxes paid, they cannot further interfere. Although we will be talking much more about taxes when we get to our Fourth Amendment. You'll want to hear that one. This is actually a perfect example of a much-needed distinction between morality and natural law. We can see that our playboy friend is not exactly the most moral human being on the planet, but he is still living in accordance to natural law. His life is his own, and until he interferes with another's, he is free to pursue his happiness how he sees fit. If, say, the church were to attempt to stop him in his pursuits, it would actually be the church who is in violation of natural law, despite them potentially having the moral high ground. The lesson here is simple. Morality often crosses paths with natural law, but natural law never crosses paths with morality. It is neither moral nor immoral. It is merely just the way of things in their natural state. It is this distinction that gives credence to the logical conclusion of liberty being an unalienable right. For if we were not free to live freely, if a certain morality was the supernatural guiding force instead of liberty, then we would all be bound by the same specific set of moral guidelines and principles. We are not, however. The playboy will continue his life of shallow debauchery, the writer will move to the mountains and write, the church will pray and do their God's work in their respective communities. Each very different from the other, but none threaten imposition against the other as well. Seeing as this is the case, then it is only logical to conclude that liberty is in fact an unalienable right. On to the last right, listed first, the right to life. In the context of our rights, life is defined as the present state of existence, in which the soul and body are united, in which natural functions and motions are performed. The word that stands out most here is soul. It is important to acknowledge that natural law, as well as our founding fathers' beliefs in it, do not sprout from any particular religious origin. In fact, it is quite the opposite, and that might be a potential bonus episode down the road. So when we say soul in this context of our rights, it is defined as that part of man which enables him to think and reason. While we've taken deeper dives into the context of pursuit of happiness and liberty, we'll find that the right to life needs much less exploration. If you're listening right now from wherever you are, then it is safe to assume an example of what it means to be alive is not necessary. It should also go without saying that if life itself was not an unalienable right in accordance with natural law, then none of us, past, present, or future, would or will ever have existed at all. Now, if at this moment you find yourself thinking, well, yeah, that's obvious, then you're already well aware of the meaning behind the very last unexplored line from today's opening quote. We hold these truths to be self-evident. Truth is the conformity to the fact or reality, an exact accordance to what is, what has been, and what shall be. Evident is defined as plain, clear to be seen, open to the mental eye, meaning the mind. To hold is to understand. In other words, we hold these truths to be self-evident could be read as we understand that these permanent facts are ridiculously obvious. Our founding fathers believed that when applying logic and reason regarding the human condition, natural law and all it encompassed was a self-evident truth. They formed our government based on the self-evident truths that all men are entitled to the rights of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. along with all the other things those three rights encompassed, rights that will be covered in this podcast. As we've gone over before, the wording in each of our founding documents is very deliberate. Take the order of these three rights we've covered today, for example: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The most fundamental of rights is the right to be alive, as no other rights matter if you're not alive to begin with. If you are alive, you're entitled to liberty, which you use then to pursue happiness. Conversely, you have a right to pursue happiness, but in order to do that, you must be free. And to even be free to begin with, you must first be alive. Whichever way you start, you can see that one right is immediately and logically preceded by the other. In other words, it becomes very obvious, a self-evident truth. However, history has shown that self-evident truths have not been so self-evident to most. Kings, emperors, and tyrants alike have abandoned these obvious rights in exchange for their own interest and gains. Our founding fathers were aware of that as well, which is why the route of revolution for them was inevitable. While attempted and even brought to fruition by lesser degrees in the past, America's foundation on the principles of natural law and unalienable rights to such an extreme and liberty-driven degree was the first of its kind. It was so novel and so inconceivable to the rest of the world in the 18th century that most could not grasp the concept of it. They couldn't even begin to fathom the very freedoms we here in America today are all so used to that we don't even realize how rare and unique it all is. Our founding fathers knew what they were attempting was rare. So rare, in fact, that in 1791, many of them anticipated future generations of Americans would suffer from the natural tyrannies of future generations of government. It was the driving force behind why a Bill of Rights was insisted upon. As we will see in the episodes to come, our Bill of Rights is a powerful and awesome force that suppresses a government's natural inclination towards tyranny. However, without the first three acknowledged rights that we covered today, found not in the Bill of Rights, but our Declaration of Independence, no other acknowledged right would even need acknowledging. Like a tree cannot exist without first planting the seeds, like a structure cannot stand without first building a proper foundation, nothing found within the Bill of Rights can hold true without first acknowledging our rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We hope you've enjoyed this expansive exploration of our first three rights as a continuation of our prologue. While heavy in both definitions and philosophies, these first two episodes have done much to lay the groundwork for a more easily digestible take on the Bill of Rights. If you have enjoyed today's episode, please join us again next week as we take a look at the first two clauses within our First Amendment regarding religious liberty. For real this time. Thank you. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Your Bill of Rights podcast by Jerkcat Entertainment. This show was written with the following titles as its sources: The Bill of Rights by James Madison, The Declaration of Independence by Thomas Jefferson, The American Constitution by the Founding Fathers, The Know Your Bill of Rights book by Sean Patrick, The Bill of Rights, Understanding the Constitution and Your Freedoms by David L. Hudson, The Bill of Rights Primer by Akil Amar and Les Adams, Behind the Bill of Rights by Bill Norton and Jeremy Nelson, In Our Defense, The Bill of Rights in Action by Ellen Alderman and Caroline Kennedy, Webster's 1828 Dictionary of the English Language, Nature, Goodness, and God, The History of Natural Law Theory by Carrie Niederman, An Essay Concerning Human Understanding by John Locke, The Essential Natural Law by Samuel Gregg, The Book of Deuteronomy from the Torah and New King James Bible, The Rational Bible, Deuteronomy by Dennis Prager, Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, How to Run a Country by Marcus Cicero, and a various array of letters, correspondences, and essays by several of our founding fathers, including but not limited to Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, George Washington, and John Adams. All music is from epidemicsound.com and is remixed at Beer and Bourbon Studios. A special thanks to Jessica Castle for the opening quote. Your Bill of Rights podcast is recorded, mixed, and mastered at Beer and Bourbon Studios and is a product of Jerkcat Entertainment. Copyright 2024.